Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans who are listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. To get this show every day, follow us wherever you get your podcast. You can also tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Mets. Now, I'm recording right now as the game is still a 7-2 score. I figure this one's going to be another Mets loss, but on today's show, what we're going to talk about is the starting pitching with who are the Mets going to sign this offseason with their impending free agents. Talked about it with Pat Ragazzo on yesterday's show, whether the Mets would go after Marcus Stroman, what he could cost. Also talked about the possibility of bringing Noah Syndergaard back on the qualifying offer. So on today's show in the first segment, going to talk about the latest with Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom coming back this year, and also get a little bit more into the Syndergaard conversation with the qualifying offer. In the second segment, going to go through Marcus Stroman's start tonight against the Red Sox, which he did not fare well, but still go through his season and the reasons why the Mets would bring him back. And then in the last segment today, going to talk about the market this offseason, who else is available, and does that mean the Mets are more likely to get their own guys, or are they going to look externally to fill out that rotation? Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets at justbaseball.com. So Noah Syndergaard is scheduled to make the first of 2 rehab appearances on Wednesday at AAA Syracuse. This means we could see him as early as next week at Citi Field. Right now, as we talked about with Pat on yesterday's show, just fastball changeup for Syndergaard, but he wants to get back out there. You can understand that, hasn't pitched since the 2019 season, wants to just show that he can go out there and still get major league hitters out and just prove he's healthy. I think we had a very similar situation years ago with Matt Harvey prior to the 2015 season. He really pushed to get back at the end of 2014. Ultimately, they never did have him pitch in the big leagues because it didn't seem like it was worth it. We could see something similar where you look up and let's just say the Mets get swept this series, lose 2 or 3 of the Brewers. They're completely out of the playoffs. Maybe they look at Noah and say, is it really worth it? But there's also a chance that because Noah wants to come back, and if he's cleared, what's the harm there? And let him go out there, throw some fastballs and changeups against some live batters in a real game. Worst case scenario, he gets knocked around, and I don't think it'll really matter too much. So we could see Syndergaard back this year. Jacob deGrom, I would be shocked at this point. I know that Luis Rojas still said that there is a chance. It's important to see the guys healthy, is what Rojas said, and see what they can do. They're still working their way back, he says, to close the gap to make a spot for the playoffs, which is their main goal, and those two would come in handy if they're at their best. They're not. The Mets aren't making the playoffs, so the idea that you would get DeGrom back this year, it's just kind of a pointless endeavor. Get him ramped up if you want to. Make sure that arm's healthy. All you should be focused about right now when it comes to Jacob deGrom is making sure that there is as a little question mark as possible heading into spring training next year. So if that means you want to see him face live batters and stuff, absolutely do that, but do that in a controlled setting at Citi Field, not in the middle of a live game. There's just no point in doing that. But that brings me to the conversation we had with Pat yesterday. Should the Mets offer Noah Syndergaard the qualifying offer? And we're going to continue to talk about this as we lead up to that decision at the end of the season and after the playoffs. But it's really a fascinating one because if you look at the market, and we're going to explore this in a little more detail in the final segment today, but the top of the market this offseason when it comes to starters, you have Kevin Gausman, Marcus Stroman, and Robbie Ray are the 3 guys coming off really good seasons who are young enough to command a long-term deal. Then you have the rest of these high-profile superstar or at least former superstar starting pitchers like Zach Greinke and Clayton Kershaw and Max Scherzer. And also you got Justin Verlander. All of them potentially can be had this offseason. The Mets could be shopping in that market, but I personally don't think we'll see that. I think that you could see Greinke and or Verlander return to Houston, and I think the same can be said with Kershaw and Scherzer in LA. Johnny Cueto, another name out there, nowhere near the same type of pitcher as the other guys we're talking about, but another guy that hit the market. So there's going to be some names out there. The Mets can certainly can certainly shop in the bargain bin when it comes to any of those guys, or not those guys, but any of the guys below that in the market to add a similar pitcher to a Tywin Walker that they got this past off season. But I think if we're looking at this Mets rotation next year, we talk about Jacob deGrom. There's question marks with the injuries now. We talk about Carlos Carrasco in his mid-30s, just had a really big injury-plagued year. You go to the rookies or the young guys, and Tyler McGill and David Peterson both have shown flashes. Can't completely trust them going into next season. Tywin Walker, really bad second half. Have to wonder, what is he? Is he more the first half all-star or the second half guy that couldn't keep the ball in the yard? There's just a lot of question marks, and that leads you to look at the two impending free agents. And when you look at the market, they seem like some of the more attractive options anyway. So with Syndergaard, the question is just, do you offer him the qualifying offer? I know Pat Ragazzo on yesterday's show, Mets beat writer, said it doesn't make a lot of sense to offer a pitcher like Syndergaard, who hasn't pitched in a couple of years, a salary of $20 million potentially. And I would say Steve Cohen has the money. I would do it, because here's what could happen if you offer him the qualifying offer. He takes it, and it's a pitcher on a one-year deal with huge upside. That's never something that I'm going to shrug off and say, oh, I don't want that pitcher because it's too much on a one-year deal. A one-year deal for a player of Noah Syndergaard's caliber is always worth it. So I'm good with it on that front. But the other one that I mentioned in passing yesterday, if Noah Syndergaard gets the qualifying offer and his representation decides, let's test the market, we can get close to that on a one-year deal elsewhere. So let's turn it down and see what we can get out there, because maybe there is a deal with a little more security, a guy who hasn't pitched in 2 years. Maybe he wants a 3-year deal with an opt-out so that you can have that flexibility in case you get hurt again, and still test the waters based on your reputation up to this point. The Mets are sitting pretty in that scenario, because you then have the financial flexibility to go after a Gausman, a Stroman, a Robbie Ray, anyone else, but you get the benefit of not only potentially having the draft compensation if Syndergaard signs elsewhere, but he can still fall right back into your lap. You know Syndergaard loves being a Met, has talked about wanting to stay, so maybe that type of a contract, the longer deal with an opt-out, is something the Mets can structure, or they might be able to get him at a number lower than the qualifying offer. So to me, it's going to happen this offseason. The reason why I wanted to talk about this again, because I've kind of mentioned this for the past month or so as we talked about Syndergaard, that a qualifying offer I believe would be inevitable. Pat kind of made me do a little bit of a pause and reconsider. If you really think about it, I still believe that is the ultimate scenario that's going to unfold, but that just makes things so much more complicated when it comes to retaining Marcus Stroman, who has been your best starting pitcher this year. And that's where the dilemma comes in. That's what we're going to talk about in just a minute. I'll go through his start tonight, one of his worst of the year, but he has been the most consistent starter on the Mets. So we'll dive into his season and whether it makes sense to go after Marcus Stroman, even if you get Syndergaard back on the qualifying offer. This episode is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Spotify Green Room is the first social audio platform made for sports fans. The app is free to download, and once you're in, you can talk with me, other fans, athletes, and insiders in real time about your favorite team or sport. I will be hosting my Spotify Green Rooms on Tuesdays, where you can finally join in on the conversation you listen to here every day. All you have to do is download the free Green Room app now, which is currently available on all devices. Be sure to create your profile, link your Twitter, join the MLB group for the latest league updates, and follow me at Finkelstein Ryan, and you'll be notified when my room goes live. I know you won't want to miss it. Again, I'm planning to be live this week, or next week, I should say, on Tuesday. I can't wait to hear everyone's thoughts on the Mets. I'll see you there. Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for the start of another NFL season. And as always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With the new updated site and interface, there's now even more odds, props, and contests available at betonline.ag, which continues to be your number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit with the promo code NFL100. That is double your initial deposit from football, basketball, baseball to boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. So Marcus Stroman did not have his best outing on Tuesday, was great through the first 3 innings and had just an amazing Houdini act in that 3rd inning where there was a bases loaded jam, no outs, gets a big double play ball. JD Davis, no double clutch on that grounder, fields it, goes home with it. They get the double play at first base. Stroman was all fired up after that. Then he gets a fly out to get out of the jam and, of course, pounding his chest as he gets off the field. I think there's going to be a lot of Mets fans that will miss that if Stroman is not on the team next year. His energy is just contagious. I think everyone loves watching this guy pitch. The Stro show, when it appears every 5 days, is one of the best that you can watch this season or watch any season. And it's even better when you got Jacob deGrom going in front of him. So hopefully we see more of that combination next year. We haven't seen nearly enough of it. You got a little taste of it the end of 2019. You got another little taste of it first half of this year. But overall, we just have not seen it all come together since Strowman came to the Mets. And I think that's what is so frustrating when it comes to this idea of him potentially walking in free agency. But getting back to the game, in the 4th inning, this is where Stroman started to run into some troubles. He struck out the first 2 batters, but then gave up a pair of doubles. The second one, though, probably should have been caught. A line drive hit right at Kevin Pillar. At times, when a ball is hit that hard right at an outfielder, it'll freeze them. They might take a first step in, and that's what happened with Pillar. He got caught flat-footed with that, tried to backpedal, get back on it, couldn't get to it. Ball goes over his head. That scored the first run of the game for the Red Sox. The Mets had a 2-0 lead before those doubles, and then in the 5th, that lead evaporated as Marcus Stroman got hit really hard by a good team, but still gave up a home run and then a double, then another home run, ends up working his way through that inning to get through 5. But this was the 4th time this year where Marcus Stroman had allowed 4 or more earned runs, so he has not had a lot of bad starts. And the interesting thing, too, is he's scattered those bad starts throughout the season. He hasn't really had a sustained rough stretch pretty much all year. There has been times where he's pitched better than others, of course, but he had 1 start in April, 1 in May, 1 in August, 1 in September, where he gave up 4 or more earned runs. Other than that, it has been nothing but, if not quality starts, at least starts where he'll go 5 innings and allow 3 or less, which gives your team a chance to win. A quality start, you have to go 6, but we're not seeing that as much anymore. So in today's game, 5 innings, giving up 3 or less is pretty solid. And for Stroman, for the most part, it's been 2 or less. 22 of his 32 starts, he has gone at least 5 innings, given up 2 runs or less. He's also gone 5 or more in all of his starts except for 4. One of those starts, he was pulled with an injury. Another was the game that was postponed after just 1 out was recorded due to rain. You look at his best starts this year, he's had 9 where he's allowed 1 run or less and has gone at least 6. The one thing you can quibble with is how deep he goes into games. Stroman has only recorded outs in the 7th inning in 8 of his starts this year, has only made it through 7 innings 4 times. He's made it through 8, 2 of those times. So you look up through 32 starts, Stroman is at an even 3 ERA with 154 strikeouts and 174 innings pitched. It's been a really good year for Marcus Stroman. If he's your ace, maybe it's not quite enough. And surely in the second half, the Mets needed somebody to maybe take things even a step further, to give you those games where they take the ball, they go 8 innings, they strike out 14 and get you through it. But he's not Jacob deGrom, and Jacob deGrom was supposed to be that guy. And unfortunately, the injuries just continue to pile on, and we haven't seen him since the All-Star break. And that has really been the biggest factor in the Mets falling from grace. I know you would point to the lineup And that's certainly been the cause day in and day out. And the Mets have gotten better pitching than you could have imagined from guys like Rich Hill and Tyler McGill in stretches. So yes, they have found a way to get good starting pitching in the second half, or at least decent starting pitching. But not having that stopper every fifth day has hurt the Mets. And even though Marcus Stroman has been great this year, he's not quite that stopper. And I think that is something you have to consider when you're talking about paying him in free agency, because if he gets that lofty price tag that Pat Ragazzo was talking about, $25 million a year, wanting 5 or 6 years, is that something that's viable for the Mets when they already had the money tied to DeGrom, Carrasco, Tywin Walker, and others? I'll talk about that in a minute, but there's also a case for why Strowman won't get that much money, and that's what makes this conversation so interesting. So before we get into that, though, I want to tell you about the best tasting protein bar ever, Built Bar. Built Bar is so delicious. It doesn't really matter what flavor you try. There really is something for everyone, whether it's the coconut bar, cherry barcia, raspberry, mint brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel, strawberry, orange, cookies and cream, which I would say is my personal favorite. But Built Bar just sent me a box of cookie dough chunk. And I don't know. We got some competition. My heart will always belong to cookies and cream, but the cookie dough chunk was really good. If you haven't tried all the flavors, you can get a mixed box where you'll get 2 of each. You can see which ones you like best. These are protein bars that taste like candy bars. They come covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft, they're easy to chew, and they're healthy. They come low in calories, low in sugar, but they're high in protein and high in fiber. If you want to try Built Bar today, go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCK15, and you'll get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching your sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the other good stuff you're missing. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings the live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. So as I said at the top of the show, whether you want to shop in the senior circuit with Zach Greinke, Clayton Kershaw, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, Johnny Cueto, or you want to look at the guys in their early 30s like Kevin Gausman, Marcus Stroman, and Robbie Ray, there's a lot of names available when it comes to starting pitchers this offseason. And I'm sure there's even more diamonds in the rough as we continue to dig through the names at a later date as we get closer to free agency and see which club options were declined, which guys pop up in the market, and who else can be had maybe at a lower rate. But I think when it comes to this Mets rotation going into next season, they need stability. And that's what Marcus Stroman brings you. He has been the most consistent starter on the Mets, one of the most consistent starters in baseball. He takes the ball every fifth day. He gives you a chance to win. You can't undervalue what that brings to a ball club. And if he is your third starter in a year where Jacob deGrom is healthy and maybe you get a little more on Carlos Carrasco or somebody else pops onto the scene, maybe you get Syndergaard back and he's really good on that qualifying offer. I mean, you have a really good team in Marcus Stroman, but the question is Stroman going to get ace money? And $25 million a year, that's ace money, okay? And to look at the last 2 years in free agency, Trevor Bauer, the only starter this past offseason who got more than $15 million a year that wasn't on the qualifying offer. You had Gausman and Stroman both accept that qualifying offer north of $18 million. And then other than that, it was Charlie Morton at 15 and then Bauer who got the massive deal with the Dodgers. You go back to the previous offseason, there was a lot of starting pitchers that came off the board at a pretty high number. You had Hyun Jin Ryu, who got $80 million over 4 years, so that's $20 million a year. Zach Wheeler, who we all wish was still a Met, got 118 over 5. That was an average annual value of $23.4 million. So if Wheeler didn't get 25, is Stroman going to? I know Stroman maybe had a better season this year than Wheeler's season going into free agency, but I think the stuff for Zach Wheeler, was a little bit better, and that maybe allowed him to have a little bit bigger of a market than Stroman might enjoy. But who knows? Maybe people will be paying based off of that ERA. If Stroman has 2 more good starts, he can get that under 3. The consistency, taking the ball 34 times this year, is something that teams are really going to value, especially as pitchers are going through an unprecedented time with missing that year in 2020 with the shortened season. So that's a lot of value to be able to get someone who takes care of their body the way Stroman does, who you can count on to make that many starts. Maybe he does get that asking price, but the other starters that went into the 2020 season that got signed, you had Dallas Keuchel, who got 18.5 when it comes to the AAV over 3, and Bumgarner, who got 17 million a year over 5 years. More interestingly, this season, Lance Lynn just got a contract extension, a 2-year deal worth $38 million with a $18 million club option that has a $1 million buyout attached. Lynn this year has a 2.47 ERA. You can make an argument he's been a better pitcher than Marcus Stroman, but has not been as durable, only made 24 starts compared to Stroman, who has made the 32. So, with all that said, what's Stroman going to get in free agency? I find it a little bit hard to believe that he would get that $25 million a year over 5 years, only because outside of Steven Strasburg, Garrett Cole, and then this past year where Trevor Bauer decided to go low years, high AAV, we haven't seen that contract given out to a pitcher of Stroman's caliber in some time. So I think you could be looking more at the neighborhood of $20 million if he were to take a 5-year deal. And if you're talking about a shorter deal, maybe that AAV goes up into that $25 million range. So maybe that's 3 for 75, or it's a 5-year deal for 100. If that's your baseline projection, it's not going to be a really tough contract to add to your books long term. I think Marcus Stroman, because he takes care of his body, as I mentioned, I think he's going to perform really well as he pitches into his 30s. He's a cerebral guy. He works off of movement, not velocity. His game should age very well, so I would not be hesitant at all to sign Marcus Stroman. So the question is, can you afford Stroman if you got Syndergaard back on the qualifying offer? You got DeGrom, Carrasco, and Walker, all those guys making north of 10. If you put it all together, you're talking about a rotation, and this is just quick math, but if you imagine about 60 for Carrasco, Walker, and DeGrom combined, 18, 19 for Syndergaard, I mean, you're getting close to $80 million. Then you add in Stroman, you're talking about a $100 million rotation. Is that something Steve Cohen can afford? I would say yes. And that is my ultimate conclusion. And we're going to, of course, continue to talk about this as we get into the offseason. And it'll be a main focal point until these guys get signed elsewhere or with the Mets. But the best route for this team next year might just be bringing a lot of this group back and hoping that with health and a couple of tweaks, this roster can perform up to expectations. When it comes to the rotation, if you go into next year with Jacob deGrom, Noah Syndergaard, Marcus Stroman, Carlos Carrasco, and Tywin Walker, with Tyler McGill and David Peterson as your first couple depth pieces on a team that would probably still have Jordan Yamamoto and would still have a lot of those guys we've talked about on our farm reports who are making strides in the upper levels of the Mets farm system, the Mets would have depth and they would have a lot of potential to have a high ceiling rotation, especially if you keep your 2 free agents. And when it comes to Kevin Gausman and Robbie Ray, those would be the 2 guys I would look at if you're not going to sign Marcus Stroman. If all these guys are making comparable salaries, Kevin Gausman has had a better year than Marcus Stroman, a 2.78 ERA, 208 strikeouts and 175 innings pitched. Robbie Ray has a 2.72 ERA with 238 strikeouts and 182 innings pitched. He's pacing the American League in both strikeouts and innings pitched. So those would be the guys that I would focus on if you're just trying to get the highest ceiling potential. But I have a feeling that based on the analytics and the way people are going to evaluate these guys, those 2 might get a little bit more than Marcus Stroman, and you might be able to get Stroman to come back on a deal that just makes sense for both sides. So this is just the first of many conversations about Stroman's free agency, but we only got 2 more starts likely this year of Marcus Stroman in a Mets uniform. So I suggest you enjoy them because there's no guarantee he's going to be back next season. Anyway, that's going to be all, though, for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. And if you don't want betting to be a guessing game anymore, check out the Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q, a handicapping expert, Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day by following the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by BetOnline.ag, wherever you get podcasts.